It's 2 a.m. and the world has finally fallen silent, but for you, the noise is just beginning. You are lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and your mind is performing a post-mortem on a day that everyone else has already forgotten. You are replaying a 3-second interaction, dissecting the tone of a stranger's voice, or perhaps you are spiraling into the terrifying architecture of the future. While the rest of the world sleeps in the blissful ignorance of the now, you are trapped in the everything. You have been told your entire life that your mind is a gift, that your depth, your empathy, and your ability to see the patterns behind the curtain are what make you special. But tonight, it doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like a tax. It feels like a physical weight behind your eyes, a relentless analytical engine that you cannot turn off, no matter how exhausted the rest of you becomes. This is the core paradox of the deep thinker. The very intelligence that was meant to navigate you through the world has become the wall between you and the world. The analytical faculty that was designed to protect you from pain has become the primary source of your suffering. You have mastered the art of understanding, but in the process, you have lost the ability to simply be. You are an expert at reading the map, but you've forgotten how to feel the dirt beneath your feet. You are suffering not because you are weak, and not because you are too sensitive, but because you are paying a mental tax that modern society was never designed to handle. You are an architect of thought living in a world of cardboard cutouts, and the structural integrity of your own mind is starting to buckle under the pressure. To understand why your mind feels like both a sanctuary and a prison, we have to look beneath the surface of personality and into the very wiring of your biology. This isn't just overthinking. It is a distinct neurological and psychological configuration. In the clinical world, we often discuss this through the lens of the default mode network, DMN. The DMN is a large-scale brain network that becomes active when you are unfocused on the outside world, when you're daydreaming, reflecting on the past, or imagining the future. In the average person, the DMN toggles on and off like a light switch. But for the deep thinker, the switch is jammed. Your brain stays in a state of resting state functional connectivity, meaning even when you are supposedly relaxing, your mind is working overtime, weaving disparate threads of information into complex webs of meaning. You aren't just thinking. You are hyper-associating. Every piece of data, a headline, a micro-expression, a historical fact, is being cross-referenced against everything else you know. This leads us to a phenomenon known as intellectualization. In psychology, intellectualization is a defense mechanism where one uses reasoning to block out unconscious conflict and its associated emotional stress. For the deep thinker, this often begins in childhood. Perhaps you grew up in an environment where emotions were unpredictable, or where your physical safety depended on your ability to read the room. You learned early on that if you could understand a problem, you could survive it. You traded the raw, messy vulnerability of feeling for the cold, structured safety of knowing. Over time, this creates a state of hypervigilance. While most people associate hypervigilance with a soldier in a foxhole, for the deep thinker, it is an intellectualized state. You aren't scanning for snipers. You're scanning for logical inconsistencies, social shifts, or existential threats. Your nervous system is perpetually upregulated, trapped in a high beta brainwave state that consumes massive amounts of glucose and mental energy. This is why you feel physically exhausted after a simple lunch with friends. Your brain was busy performing a million background calculations while everyone else was just eating a sandwich. Then there is the concept of complexity trauma. Unlike a single acute event, complexity trauma is the result of being too aware for too long. It is the exhaustion of seeing the structural flaws in the systems around you, the workplace, the government, the family unit, and feeling the heavy burden of that insight. Most people can walk through a burning building as long as they don't look at the flames. You, however, are cursed with a thermal camera. You see the heat signatures of every problem, And because you are a deep thinker, you feel a moral obligation to solve them. This creates a neurological loop. Because you perceive more complexity, you feel more anxiety. Because you feel more anxiety, your brain seeks more information to solve the anxiety. But in our modern, hyper-connected society, there is an infinite supply of information. You are attempting to quench a fire by pouring more wood onto it. You aren't just smart, you are hyper-attuned. And in an age of sensory overload, that attunement acts as a lightning rod for the world's chaos. We must also address cognitive decoupling. This is the ability to separate a thought from its context and manipulate it in the abstract. Deep thinkers have a high capacity for this, which allows for brilliant philosophy and innovation. However, the mental tax is that you become decoupled from your own body. You begin to treat your physical self as a mere transport vessel for your head. You ignore the gut feeling or the tightness in your chest because you are too busy trying to figure out why the tightness is there. You have replaced somatic wisdom with theoretical data. You are essentially running a supercomputer on a battery designed for a flashlight. The deep thinker doesn't just think more. They process deeper, feel broader, and retain longer. Your brain has been rewired by years of using knowing as a shield. But a shield, no matter how well crafted, is still a heavy thing to carry. You have become so good at defending yourself with your intellect that you have forgotten how to lay the shield down and simply breathe. The burden of the deep thinker is often an invisible one, a quiet grief that carries no funeral and seeks no sympathy. It is the grief of existential isolation. When you see the world in high definition, when you see the layers of subtext in every conversation, and the inevitable decay in every beautiful moment, you begin to experience what Friedrich Nietzsche famously described as the weight of the greatest stress. Nietzsche spoke of the Übermensch, or the overman, who must look into the abyss without blinking. But what the philosophy books often omit is how cold it gets when you stare into that abyss for too long. For you, the emotional cost is the loss of the hurt's warmth. Most people move through life with a form of psychological armor, a healthy dose of denial that allows them to enjoy a party, a promotion, or a purchase without questioning the inherent transience of it all. But your armor is missing. You are skinless in a world of jagged edges. Consider the allegory of the cave. Plato describes prisoners who spend their lives watching shadows on a wall, believing those shadows to be reality. One prisoner escapes, sees the sun, and understands the true nature of the world. But when he returns to the cave to free the others, he is mocked. His eyes, now adjusted to the light, can no longer track the shadows as well as the prisoners can. This is your reality. Your light, your insight has made you clumsy in the world of shadows. You find small talk excruciating because it feels like a betrayal of the truth. You find hustle culture absurd because you see the hollow end goal. You are paying a tax of alienation, sitting in a room full of people and feeling miles away because you are operating on a frequency they cannot hear. This weight manifests as a profound fear of presence. Because your mind is a predictive machine, it is almost impossible for you to be here. You are always 3 steps ahead, calculating the potential fallout of a relationship or the eventual end of a career. You sacrifice the authenticity of the moment for the security of the forecast. This is the mental tax in its most predatory form. It robs you of the only thing that is actually real, the present, in exchange for a series of simulated futures that may never happen. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once argued that a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. And if he does not love solitude, he will not love liberty. For it is only when he is alone that he is really free. But for the modern deep thinker, this solitude is a double-edged sword. You crave it to escape the overstimulation of the shadow watchers, yet once you are alone, the silence is filled by the roaring engine of your own critique. You become your own most merciless judge, using your vast vocabulary and analytical skills to prosecute your own perceived failures. This leads to a state of invisible grief. You are mourning the person you could have been if you weren't so aware. You see people who can simply fall in love without a SWOT analysis, or people who can enjoy a hobby without wondering if it's productive or meaningful. There is a deep, stinging envy for the simple life. You are grieving the loss of your own simplicity, a casualty of your own evolution. At the core of this pain is the sacrifice of belonging for truth. Human beings are wired for attachment. We need the tribe to survive, but the deep thinker often finds that their truth makes the tribe uncomfortable. To fit in, you have to dim your bulbs. You have to pretend to care about the trivialities that consume others. Or worse, you have to suppress your insights so you don't come across as pretentious or intense. This leads to a fractured identity. You carry the weight of a secret self, the philosopher king living inside a cubicle dweller. The emotional cost is a chronic, low-level moral injury. It is the pain of knowing better, but being unable to act the exhaustion of feeling the world's tragedies as if they were your own, and the crushing loneliness of having a rich inner world that feels more like a desert than a garden. You are in exile in your own life, perpetually searching for a home that is as deep as your own thoughts, yet finding only the shallow waters of a society that prizes speed over depth and noise over silence. As you transition into adulthood, the strategies that once served as your mental armor begin to calcify into your personality. You might think these behaviors are just who you are, but in reality, they are often sophisticated coping mechanisms, elaborate scaffolding built around a core that feels perpetually unsafe. To unlearn the mental tax, we must first witness the symptoms of the tax in your daily life. These are not true personality traits. They are protective adaptations. Here are the 6 specific manifestations of the deep thinker in the modern world. 1. The observer effect in relationships. You are rarely in a relationship. You are witnessing yourself in a relationship. Even in moments of intimacy, a part of your mind is floating near the ceiling, taking notes, analyzing the power dynamics, or predicting the inevitable end. You struggle with the observer effect, the psychological principle that the act of observing a phenomenon changes the phenomenon itself. Because you are constantly analyzing the love you receive, you inadvertently strip it of its spontaneity, making it feel clinical rather than felt. 2. Hyper-responsibility and the global burden. Deep thinkers often suffer from an overactive sense of agency. You feel personally responsible for solving systemic problems that are far beyond your control. If a friend is sad, you don't just offer a shoulder. You offer a root cause analysis. If the world is in crisis, you feel a visceral guilt for your own moments of peace. This is often a remnant of parentification, where as a child, you felt you had to be the emotional anchor for the adults around you. As an adult, you carry the world's weight because you haven't learned that it is okay to be just a person. 3. The rejection of compliments, the motive hunt. When someone praises you, your brain doesn't register a win. It registers a data point that needs verification. You immediately begin scanning for their motive. What do they want? Are they being manipulative? Do they only like the useful version of me? You have been burned by people who loved your depth until that depth became inconvenient, so now you treat kindness like a Trojan horse. 4. The wait-and-see approach to agency. You are a master of the long game, but this often leads to a paralysis of action. You wait for more data, more clarity, or the perfect moment to start your project or change your life. You are so aware of the potential for failure and the complexity of the butterfly effect that you choose the safety of the spectator's seat. You become a chronic preparer, perpetually sharpening the axe, but never actually swinging at the tree. 5. Intellectual burnout, mental tab opening. Your mind is like a browser with 150 tabs open, and 40 of them are playing music you can't find. This is the executive function tax, because you find meaning in everything. Nothing is small. Deciding what to eat for dinner can become a philosophical debate about sustainability, health, and economics. This leads to decision fatigue, leaving you depleted for the things that actually matter. You are exhausted not by what you do, but by what you process. 6. The curation of the false intellectual self. To survive a shallow world, you have learned to perform your intelligence. You use your vast vocabulary and complex ideas as a social barrier. If you can keep people engaged in a high-level intellectual debate, they won't look too closely at your heart. You sound smart so you don't have to feel small. This creates a double bind. You want to be known, yet you use your most visible trait, your mind, to hide your most vulnerable trait, your humanity. The unlearning, the shift begins when you stop viewing these symptoms as flaws and start seeing them as exhausted bodyguards. You have to begin the process of witnessing the pain instead of gaslighting yourself into thinking you should just be more positive. Unlearning the mental tax requires a radical act of intellectual humility. You must accept that your mind, as brilliant as it is a flawed narrator. It is often wrong about the threats it perceives. You have to start questioning the questioner. When your mind spirals into a what-if scenario, you must learn to ask, is this thought helpful or is it just loud? This is the bridge to healing, moving from a state where your thoughts possess you to a state where you observe your thoughts. You are not your default mode network. You are the awareness that notices the network is running. The goal of the adult deep thinker is to move from analysis to integration, to stop using the mind as a weapon against the self and start using it as a tool for the soul. The journey toward healing for the deep thinker is not about thinking less. You cannot simply lobotomize your curiosity or pretend to be someone who finds fulfillment in the superficial. Rather, healing is about somatic integration, the process of bringing that massive, soaring intellect back down into the body. It is about closing the gap between the architect in your head and the animal in your chest. The first step is a radical departure from your usual strategy. You must stop trying to understand your way out of your pain. You cannot solve a feeling with a formula. As the poet Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, be patient toward all that is unresolved in your heart and try to love the questions themselves. For a deep thinker, the ultimate healing act is to sit with an unanswered question and not feel the need to fix the silence. The path to wholeness. Reparenting the mind healing requires a process of inner child reparenting. That child who learned that being smart was the only way to be safe needs to be told that they are allowed to be dumb. They are allowed to be messy, to be wrong, and to be profoundly unproductive. You must cultivate what Zen Buddhism calls beginner's mind, a state of being where you approach the world without the burden of your past knowing. Practical healing for the deep thinker often looks like shadow work, acknowledging the part of you that uses your intellect to feel superior as a way to mask your deep-seated fear of being unlovable. Somatic grounding, engaging in activities that bypass the brain, weightlifting, cold exposure, or gardening, where the feedback loop is physical rather than conceptual. Choosing softness, intentionally seeking out low-stakes joy. Watching the sunset without analyzing the Rayleigh scattering of light. Loving someone without performing a psychological profile on them. Carl Jung once noted, your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. For too long, you have been looking outside at the patterns of the world, trying to dream up a way to fit in. But true awakening comes when you realize that your depth is not a problem to be solved, but a landscape to be inhabited. The mental tax you have been paying is actually the interest on a debt you never owed. You do not owe the world a solution to every problem. You do not owe your friends a constant stream of insight. And you certainly do not owe yourself a life of perpetual self-interrogation. You are not too much. You are not broken. You're a finely tuned instrument in a world that is often played with a hammer. Your suffering in modern society isn't a sign of failure. It is a sign of your humanity. The goal of this journey is not to become fixed, it is to become whole. To be a person who can think deeply about the cosmos at 2 a.m., but can also feel the warmth of a cup of coffee at 8 a.m. without needing to explain why it matters. You are the witness of the world's beauty and its pain. But remember, a witness who never leaves the courtroom eventually loses sight of the sun. Come back to the world. Come back to your body. The depth will always be there, that you don't have to drown in it. If this resonated with you, it is because you have spent a long time feeling like an alien in your own skin. You aren't alone. There are others out there staring at the same ceilings, asking the same questions. By sharing your journey and subscribing to these deeper conversations, we begin to build a new tribe. One where depth is not a tax, but a shared language. You have spent your whole life trying to understand the world. Now, for the first time, give yourself permission to simply live in it.